We are. We're at the San Mateo Convention Center, the event center here for the Flower and Garden Show 2014. And I'm with Inception Media. This is Joseph Simcox.
And I am the Botanical Explorer because that seems to be the name that sticks when people ask me what I do. And my work is going around the world and discovering all the incredible plants that humans can use.
How many countries have you visited since this project began?
Well, it's a lifelong project. I show this little picture when I start giving certain presentations of being a squash collector at 6 years of age. So people ask, how long have you been doing this? A whole lifetime, and I'm 50 now. So the story is 4 decades plus. And going around the world and finding plants has become such an obsession that I've been to around 104 countries.
You've traveled with Jason Piper
Yes.
to Ethiopia, Peru, Guatemala, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia.
Well, and each one of those is a crazy story because, you know, inevitably when you're traveling, you have things that go as planned, and then you have things that go completely unexpectedly. And we're more than eager to get our message to the crowd. So we'll be talking about all the amazing things that are sometimes not perceived as vegetables that home gardeners can grow. You know, it's basically expanding your population of vegetable plants 1,000%.
And then the intention is to collect them and grow them locally
seeds
from seed, so that you're not maybe purchasing
that is
and
a very
having
good part of
things
it.
shipped in, the carbon footprint. How do you feel about all of that?
In order to better answer your question, let me start out giving a quick description of why plants are successful on the planet. Plants are successful on the planet because they make seeds. We're talking about the flowering plants.
Yes.
Flowering plants produce a super abundance of seeds. If you just imagine a tomato plant producing 20, 30, 40 tomatoes, each one of those tomatoes has a huge number of seeds. So in nature, seeds are a way of assuring that a species survives. We as human beings can take an incredible opportunity of that and save our own seeds and grow our vegetables over and over again.
And it's incredibly resourceful. I know that some of the themes here concerning gray water and repurposing rainwater to have drought-resistant procedures in the garden is really important, and I feel like that is also applicable here and very innovative. What are a few of your favorite seeds, your favorite finds?
Well, okay, so I'll answer that, but because you pointed out a few things that make me want to talk about the grand symphony. Nature is a grand symphony. When you talk about the reutilization of our own human waste products, bringing together all of those elements in a harmonious, holistic system, because the planet, before man started tearing it apart, worked perfectly. When we started intervening and changing the infrastructure of the environment, things started to go askew. So now we're in a position, looking at the human degradation of the planet, to reconsider. So this conference, as you say, or this show, is pointing out, the use of gray water, the use of worms, the use of biodynamic principles. We're learning how to relive with nature, and that's what we really have to do. So saving your seeds is a part of that story. It's one of the spokes in the wheel, if you will. It's harmonious with nature. Oh, there's not a food crisis. There's plenty of different things to eat. We just have to focus on them. The food crisis is perhaps mal-conceived. There are people starving in certain parts of the world. There's about 1.2 billion people who presumably go to bed hungry every night. Those are real tragedies for humanity. I don't believe they should exist. I don't believe these terrible problems should exist. I think there's a problem of modernization, as I referred to the change of our ecosystems, the change of the way we live on the land. And even in many countries which are becoming richer, at least economically, I contend people are becoming poor. An example to tell you about is in Mexico. People are getting better incomes. They buy more and more processed and store-bought food, and little by little they're losing their traditions, say of their parents or grandparents, of raising food in little plots or in their land. So even though they're economically better off, they're poor because they've lost food traditions which were essential to making them healthy individuals. So the food crisis then, if we bring it into another perspective, is a publicity stunt on the part, I contend, of certain major interests.
Okay.
There is not a food crisis. If you were to listen to some of the most important people in the nation, they contend that the only way we can feed a hungry world is through genetically modifying the plants that we know now. Well, what are those plants? For all intents and purposes, humanity feeds itself on 10 or 12 plants. Of those, corn, bean, rice, potatoes. So it's conceived that we have to make corn resilient to drought. It's conceived that we have to make rice resilient to a plethora of plagues. That is a nonsensical approach from a biodiversity standpoint, because there aren't just 10 or 12 different types of food plants. There are literally thousands of them. If we ask the big question, how did men and women survive all over the planet before modernization? Well, they lived on the food plants that grew in the areas, whether it was in the mountains of Africa, whether it was in the deserts of northern Africa, whether it was the swamps of Asia. They lived, and they had plants that fed them. By using this experience, we should ask ourselves how we can domesticate and improve those plants for the future of all humanity. And that's the basis of my work.
And in closing, Mr. Simcox, what are a few organizations that you've worked with that you feel you would like to continue to collaborate with, or ones that you anticipate doing so that you've not yet reached out to?
Well, there's several approaches that I've had over the years. First, many years ago, I thought I would go to very poor places and start trying to teach people how to feed themselves. I realized early on, actually it was a few years on, that you can't help people help themselves unless they want to change. You can't go and pretend to be a savior of people. So I gave that approach up. Then I started asking the question how the influence could be by sharing my experience, sharing seeds. So I've sent seeds to hundreds of people all over the world like a little Johnny Appleseed. That has a certain influence. And then, basically 3 years ago, I was forced by a friend of mine, I was at a conference in India, to come forth and give a talk. He said, Joe, you're going to give a talk in 5 minutes. His name was Professor Raj Mizrahi. And he told me that he wanted me to come and talk. And I said, well, I'm not ready for it. He said, yes, you are. You've been doing this too long. So I gave my first talk and realized at that point that I had a message that I could share. And that got me onto a new road.
Through education.
Through education and sharing my experiences, and perhaps sharing my passion for what all this means. I can speak from years and years of study and experience and share that knowledge in a compact and efficient way. So my earliest experiences were trying to do things as a family unit, trying to think that we could do something as individuals to influence the future of poor people. I started working with gene banks and scientific organizations all over the world, exchanging seeds, writing and sharing that knowledge. And so I've been very fortunate to have a number of supporters who basically gave me carte blanche and told me to go out there and do what I do, and just gave me complete trust, whether they were important nurseries in North America, nurseries in Europe. I mean, they wanted me to bring new plants to cultivation. The pressures of consumers who want better food, but they're interested, even PepsiCo, the large multi-billion-dollar company, the chief scientific officer, Mohammed Khan, wrote a letter and had his chief talent scout call us and ask how we could work with them.
In regard to the current technological boom in San Francisco, with the influx of YouTube and Google, I've noticed that there's been some design and incorporation of nature on the premises with landscaping and beautification. Do you feel like these lectures would be appropriate in informing staff there, like just in terms of professional and personal development, with gardening? Like how would you approach something like that industry?
It's very important, because the first thing to do is imagine yourself on a highway. We have a super developed country, we have extraordinary infrastructure, at least for functionality, but does it really feed the soul? When you're stuck in a traffic jam for 4 hours a day, going in and out of town to go to work and go home, does your soul really suffer the consequences of this bland, dry, dead atmosphere? So the real future,
so not only would it be like stress reduction for professionals,
stress reduction,
it could also be resourcefulness and preservation of.
Well, it's the economy of the future. If we take our infrastructures that we have and we remake them, think of how much industry, how much creativity, how much industry that will create an economy to redo what we already have.
Well, thank you, Joseph Simcox. It's so good to meet you.
It's a pleasure.